Um, Reality is being rewritten before our eyes. Some Americans can see this and understand it. The results include an inescapable feeling of dread and doom. The frustration mounts because as a group, those who see the truth and are ready to speak it do not yet have the full vocabulary required to make sense of it all. Usually, Trump supporters don't make sense at all. To many other Americans, it appears that they do not care about the blatant effort by the Republican fascists and others to rewrite reality of what we saw, and they are indifferent or tired, or they're just so hyper focused on their own lives that nihilism and surrender are preferable to confrontation and engagement. Others are either incapable or unwilling to remain in a profound state of denial. But this is not a claim about some grand secret conspiracy. It's an observation about how, how is, and it's an observation about how people function in a society that's caught in an interregnum, that time of in betweenness when the old is given away to something new, and potentially something horrible, when truth and reality are being dismembered by fascists and their fellow travelers. It all feels like a confusing what they call blow. Give it
Yeah,
shut up to me.
you shut up.
It's like a confusing blur. For those of us who do care and choose to see the truth, what do we do when the final form of the entire ugliness behind America's crisis of democracy is finally revealed? On January 6th, Donald Trump and his cabal attempted a coup to overthrow the American democracy. But as a part of that coup plot, Trump's sycophants launched the lethal terrorist attack on the U.S. Capitol, and these events were publicly announced by Trump, his spokespeople, allies, and sycophants. America's political elites, including too many among the news media, chose to ignore these warnings or somehow convince themselves that it was all hyperbole, which it wasn't. With a few notable exceptions, the mainstream news media and other public voices described the right-wing terrorist attack on the Capitol in relatively benign terms as the acts of a disorganized mob, or as something spontaneous and shocking. Donald Trump and his propagandists and co-conspirators, on the other hand, created their own alternative reality in which January 6th was a festive gathering, a regular day when many tourists decided to visit the Capitol, and that's not what it was. Alternatively, the right-wing propaganda machine argued that yes, there was political violence, but that they claimed it was actually committed by Antifa or Black Lives Matter activists, which it wasn't, as part of a false flag operation to harm Trump and the Republican Party's supposedly pristine reputation, which they don't have any reputation. It is a lie, of course, but public opinion polls and other evidence reveal that a large majority of the Republicans and Trump sycophants, as though there were some meaningful distinction between those groups, believe in the big lie and the many little lies that support it. As more information about how close Donald Trump and his cabal really came to nullifying the 2020 election has become known, and the language has shifted. Now the mainstream media says insurrection rather than mob. That's certainly a more accurate description, but it still fails to capture the scale of Trump's cabal's efforts to overthrow the American democracy. The insurrection suggests something momentarily, as opposed to a sustained attack, on whose result it would be a long-term and perhaps permanent change in the American society and government. But Trump and his forces wanted to spark a fascist revolution in America, and January 6th was not intended as a one-off outburst of white authoritarian fascist rage. In her review of the new HBO documentary 4 Hours at the Capitol, Sophie Gilbert of The Atlantic grapples with the question of what language to use in describing these events. And here's the little article that she put up. In the days and weeks after the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th of 2021, commentators and media outlets grappled with the question of what to call that event. Language is sticky. It clarifies and obfuscates the truth depending on who's wielding it. January 6th was described as likened to a riot or a tourist visit, an insurrection, a peaceful protest, and a coup attempt. And yet, watching 4 Hours at the Capitol, Jamie Roberts' tight, unsettling new HBO documentary about that day, another word seemed more appropriate to me, one that most of the participants interviewed in the film might agree on. More than anything else, January 6th was war. With his rigidly chronological framing and his interviews with people who were present at the Capitol today, the director Jamie Roberts captures the extent to which both sides were engaging in combat. This dynamic emerges over and over again throughout different accounts and video clips, and one clash between Capitol police officers and pro-Trump extremists is referred to by a participant as the battle for the tunnel. Different interviewees described fighting on the front line engaging in hand-to-hand combat. In the case of the one police officer, the strangeness of walking through his own colleague's blood, in a scene that seems ripped right out of a Bruce Willis movie. A police commander shouts, "We are not losing the U.S. Capitol today. Do you fucking hear me?" Gilbert continues by observing that Capitol Police are, of course, equipped to deal with violent threats, but are not trained for warfare, which is what must have made January 6th and their task of defending the U.S. Capitol seem so absurd. It was the first time hostile forces had invaded the Capitol in large numbers since the War of 1812, and what the film captures, Gilbert includes, is simple: pro-pumpkin tit forces went to war against American officers charged with defending democracy. A series of recent books, most notably the Bob Woodward and Robert Costas Perel, have offered evidence that Trump and his sycophants were following a detailed plan that was meant to replace a democratic system with an autocracy where Trump would remain president indefinitely, or squatter indefinitely, and this plan came close to succeeding. But Rolling Stone reports that dozens of meetings occurred between Trump's coup sycophants and those others who organized the Klan rallies on January 6, which served as a staging ground for the attack on the Capitol. At least one high-ranking Trump White House official and several Republican members of Congress allegedly took part in these Klan meetings. Donald Trump and his allies are continuing to encourage the right-wing political violence as part of the Big Lie strategy to undermine Joe Biden's presidency and to further radicalize the sycophants of the Republican fascist movement. Unfortunately, Attorney General Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice have so far done nothing to hold Trump and other leaders of the coup plot accountable for their apparent crimes. But Biden and the Democratic leadership are also not exerting the pressure necessary to ensure that Trump and his co-conspirators are punished to the maximum extent of the law. As the nation, Elie Mystal laments at the DOJ's failure to investigate the planning of the push is the all more shameful given the publicly available evidence that the insurrectionists may have had help on the inside. Now here's the article of what somebody had wrote here. It says, for instance, the people who sacked the Capitol had made a beeline for the Senate's parliamentarian's office. Pictures after the push showed that the office had been ransacked. The location of the office is not obvious. It's one of those places that is hard to find unless you've been there before. But the insurrectionists somehow got there and began looking for the hard copies of the electoral votes that Congress began looking for the hard copies of the electoral votes that Congress was meant to certify that day. And had they gotten their hands on those votes, I'm kind of busy right now, just set it up there. Had they gotten their hands on those votes even for a moment, they would have broken the chain of custody of the Electoral College count and at least delayed the certification of the election, which is what their goal was, and they failed on that. It strains credulity to think that a bunch of white supremacists and shamans knew precisely where to go and what to look for on their own. But at the very least, a thorough criminal investigation of events would seek to uncover where these people got that information. It would look into claims that tours were given beforehand to eventual insurrectionists. Congress can piece together events, but the DOJ and the FBI are not supposed to wait until the political branches get it together before investigating and prosecuting people for their crimes. At some point in the near future, the American people and the world will likely learn the full details of the Trump regime's coup plot, or at least as full as an accounting as we will ever get. But what if the American people simply don't give a fuck? And what if the overall public response is indifferent and a feeling of futility, driven by the perceived need to move on, or the feeling that nothing fucking matters anymore? That will leave the door open for the next fascist coup attempt and serve as an act of surrender and abandon, which was very likely the plan from the beginning. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.